Hello and welcome. I'm Barkha Dutt. This is the Mojo story. Today marks 1 year to the exact date of the Galwan Clash that took place in the high Himalayas between India and China, when 20 of our brave hearts of the Indian Army gave up their lives, were sacrificed in the line of duty. Since then, much has happened in the eastern Ladakh sector, including an audacious Indian military operation that was able to wrest areas back from the Chinese and also bring them to the dialogue table. But then COVID happened, and the country has been preoccupied since then with that and only that. So, 1 year after Galwan, we asked three experts where exactly do the two countries stand after these images made headlines of a high voltage disengagement between the two countries. Military experts and diplomats had at the time warned that this was only a sectoral disengagement, this was not a resolution. What has happened since then? What shape and form has the disengagement taken, or is it stalemate? And if it is, how should India respond? Remember, there was a time when there were calls for an economic boycott of China, when the real imperialist expansionism of China was seen in how China had infiltrated our markets, not only territory in the Himalayas. What happened to that entire conversation? Did we move on from those fault lines far too quickly? Has our preoccupation with COVID actually caused us to drop the ball on the India-China equation? Let's introduce our panelists today. We're joined on the program by Lieutenant General Satish Dua, who is, of course, has been former General Officer Commanding of the 15th Corps. General Ata Hasnain joins us as well. Welcome to the program, sir. Has also served as GOC of 15th Corps. And then Ambassador KC Singh, a veteran diplomat, is with us as well. Before I come to the actual military brass tacks, KC, let me actually start with you and get a sense of what's going on in terms of diplomacy. We saw, in a sense, a softening of language with China, and it came out of the blue. We don't actually know what context, explained anything different. We do have details. I traveled to Ladakh myself of the military operation that helped bring China to the dialogue table. But since then, as I said, we don't actually know what's been moving or not moving. Would you describe the situation as status quo since the disengagement, or do you think we've made progress?
No, I think what's happened is because the government was so keen to be not seen as in any way compromising, or particularly PM's image as a hyper-nationalist, as someone who defended India. So we made a tactical mistake, then we made a tactical gain, then we made a tactical compromise. The tactical mistake was for the Prime Minister to say nobody is intruded, no one has come into the country. The Chinese seized on that and they said, look, we haven't intruded. Your Prime Minister is saying we haven't intruded. Now, that may have been okay to basically project domestically, but nobody bought it. And I think the government then realized that they had made a mistake. But in the process, what's happened is that they started changing the language. Some of these are legacy issues. Focus then came to, but then the army did get us a negotiating chip by getting the Kailash Heights.
Yeah.
But in the process, what happened is that the Chinese made threatening noises but didn't go to war over it. So the Chinese realized that they needed to de-escalate sectorally, not all across the area, but in one part. And they did a trade-off, like in a chess game. They said, okay, Pangong, so we'll step back a little and you take your people off Kailash Heights. Now, a number of military people have said that this was a tactical mistake. We should have stayed on top and waited for the Chinese till summer, which is where we are at the moment. But in the process, I think India desperately needed a face saver at that stage. They needed to get the public attention off Ladakh. And by then, the first wave of COVID was tapering off and the government was opening up, and they thought we've got the disease behind us. And then they had elections coming up. And with BJP, elections take primacy over literally everything, sometimes even breathing, as far as I can see. So then came West Bengal. Then came, they advanced the Kumbh Mela by 1 year. So you could see that the entire focus was that and UP election. Because the Kumbh Mela should have been actually next year after the UP election. But they wanted it this year so that it happens and they get the gain. So the focus was entirely on domestic issues. They wanted to buy peace there. They wanted public attention off Ladakh. But in the process, we left it half done. Because there is Depsang Plains, there is Gogra, there is hot springs, where the Chinese are definitely ahead or up to their maximalist patrolling positions, and India is being blocked from patrolling in
Right.
that area. So
Right.
it's been left kind of half cooked. But one
Half
final
cooked.
point: tactically, maybe the Chinese have an advantage, but strategically, I think they have lost. Because if you see what has happened at the G7, you see total unity between US and the Europeans, with China being seen as a primary challenge. So it is climate change, it's the disease, and it's China. And China is involved with the disease in any case. So
Yeah.
therefore, what have they gained? They've really seen the whole world, developed countries, the major developed countries and the industrial powers converge. They had invited India for a discussion. So you got a convergence. So what have they gained strategically?
Yeah, I think that's well put. That in a post COVID or in a present COVID world with the Biden administration, there is a great deal of global sentiment against China. But in pure terms of what's happening on the ground at Ladakh, General Hasnain, this point was made even after, as I said, that audacious, very courageous military operation that helped bring China to the negotiating table, that was seen to finally lift the ghost, as it were, of 1962, wherein India actually went into territory that the Chinese really wanted badly. And that Kailash operation, a lot of people have said we should not have agreed, even as part of the negotiation, to recede from there, not to hand it back as much as to recede from there.
Thank you, Barkha. Thank you for having me on this show, and very relevant question which has been raised. KC Saab has definitely given a very, very, an analytical picture of this entire issue at the moment. Very well presented. Let me just get into it and give a slightly different perception to it. I'm not going to comment on the political commentary at all. I will look at primarily the situation on the ground. What happened on the night of 29th, 30th August 2020 was that we took the Chinese by surprise, and we took over the heights, the 7 heights on the Kailash ranges. Of course, it was a huge success, but I still qualify it. A lot of people in the army kept on saying later on that we should have never vacated the heights, but I maintain one aspect, and that is, were these heights of such a strategic significance that it was sufficient for us to actually compensate for the entire front in Ladakh? To my mind, no. We had lost something in Pangong Tso, the North Pangong Tso. We gained quid pro quo, we gained something in South Pangong Tso, and I think that was something which was just sufficient. It was a balance, it was a trade-off. Everyone was expecting that by touching something on the Kailash heights, to 7 ranges, the Chinese are going to withdraw from every part of the transgressions that they have made. It's not so. If you do a proper tactical operational analysis of the ground in Chushul area, you will realize that the Chinese were worried because that is where their war center for Ladakh is, right there at Moldo. That was under threat. Right?
Yeah.
And we were sitting right on top of that. But they also realized that a shooting war starting from the Kailash heights can't just continue there itself. It would spread all over Ladakh. It will lead to war virtually. So it was quite clear that it was a trade-off, primarily a good trade-off that we had achieved. And at the end of the day, it was only an exchange which could take place locally within the Chushul Pangong Tso area.
But
It
when
could
you
not
say
really extend all the way to
no,
Depsang.
yes, but the fact of the matter is that when you say that was it worth that much, it was worth enough for the Chinese to come to the negotiating table. The fact that we were able to look directly at Moldo, the garrison town of the Chinese, look down from the Kailash heights, it was enough to bring the Chinese to the negotiating table. We now know, General Hasnain, from a reporting trip I undertook, that our tanks, our men, were sometimes just a few meters apart, and how they stood like that for months altogether is staggering. I can
Absolutely.
only imagine the tension, because
There
imagine
is
that
no doubt about that.
but
There is
why
no
do
doubt
you
about the fact that it was a very important operation. It was a very important piece of ground which was taken. But I once again say that there will be different opinions about what the strategic significance of that piece of ground was in terms of its operational difference that it was making along the line of actual control. I
Let
don't
me
think
put
it could have led to Depsang being actually traded for.
fair point. Let me put that to General Dua. Do you think that that situation would have been any different from status quo today had we not surrendered those strategic heights that our army was able to take?
Um, Let me add to what General Hasnain mentioned, and you also spoke of tanks being in an eyeball-to-eyeball confrontation. I mean,
Yeah.
figuratively speaking, here are two nuclear countries facing in an eyeball-to-eyeball configuration. We have a history of Galwan behind us. This was a very dangerous situation because, if you recall, there have been two lone incidents of a soldier, two separate incidents of one soldier at each time crossing over, and they were caught
Yes.
by the Indian forces. Imagine if one of our soldiers had opened fire. Imagine where it could have just spiraled out of control, and there would be no stopping it. You also recall that at this place, shots were fired at one point of time, though it did not result in any casualties. What if the shots that were fired had resulted in casualties? What I'm trying to say is that anything could have happened, and General Snan also alluded to it. If it spiraled out of control, we wouldn't know where it would stop in space or time. Then I think it was very important for us to disengage, and that is why disengagement meant putting some distance between our forces, because this would have been an era of a strategic corporal. I mean, someone in the front line could have actually sparked off a nuclear war, so to speak. So I personally feel that, having said this, that this was how did we create this a position of tactical advantage. This was much after Galwan. It was created by Indian forces so that
Correct.
we were at a better tactical advantage, as well as on the bargaining table, we were at an advantage, right? So when we disengaged with a purpose, and I think that purpose has been met. Um,
What, but
just
what about
to
the
just
status quo now? Because when the Chinese and Indians left the last round of talks, there was an agreement from the Chinese that hot springs and Depsang was a work in progress. There wasn't a refusal, and that those were the terms on which that round of negotiation was actually settled. Now it seems
true.
to me that the Chinese have reneged on their word yet again.
I um, I think that would be an oversimplification. I'm also not trying to
Okay,
split here, but the fact is, it was decided that first we'll take care of this area, like General Snan also mentioned, and
yeah.
then we will go on to other areas. True that the progress on the other fronts is rather slow. In fact, now they've on the anniversary they've come out with trying to degrade or downscale the level of talks to a major general level talks. So the fact remains, and we have been engaging at diplomatic and other levels, albeit a little slowly than we would have wanted to, seeing the pace earlier or compared to the pace earlier. That is true. But the fact still remains that we are not in a confrontationist mode. We are actually talking, engaging at military diplomatic level. We are following the CBMs on both sides are following it. It is taking time, but time alone will tell as to how we go further from it.
Okay. Ambassador KC Singh, how do you see the diplomacy on this front playing out with the G7, as you said, coalescing, against China? India clearly seen as an ally, a key ally against China. In fact, one of the mistakes, it could be argued, that we made on the vaccines came from a place of that vaccine competition, because China was distributing its vaccines everywhere in the region, and I think there was a sense in the Foreign Office that we had to do the same, not, of course, realizing how badly the second wave would hit us at the time.
I don't think that's a major element of irritation between us and China. Look, the Chinese operate on strategic calculations. They would keep the boot on a neck in these three areas because they want to condition a strategic behavior, which means the larger competition with US. How is India kept neutral? How does India remain a balancing power rather than taking sides with them? Now, it's a complex game because and even in the past, some of the confrontation points that we've had, it's taken sometimes years to resolve them with Chinese. Uh, Look, the trade with the Chinese, as the figures have come out, in the first quarter, actually higher than in the last quarter. And ironically, it's mostly medical supplies and stuff that we require to combat the pandemic, which has come out of China. So this is going on. But nevertheless, it's not business as usual. In many areas, the Chinese are blocked. In 5G, we are resisting them. So Chinese will they'll calculate their numbers. They'll see where their strategic disadvantage increases and the advantages diminish. At that point, they may start climbing down. Therefore, India will have to play this complex balancing game. That's why we are not openly patrolling with the American vessels in South China Sea. We are doing our own patrolling. So we will keep an sort of arm holding, hand holding with the Quad powers. But we are not about to go forward and start functioning as full-fledged allies. We've engaged NATO. We've engaged NATO for many, many years, definitely since 2001 when NATO came to Afghanistan. So all this will go on. So it'll be a balancing game, but essentially it'll depend on how quickly we can get our economy back on its feet, whether a third wave hits us, how quickly we can militarily acquire what we want to acquire. At the same time, see what can we offer the Chinese, which builds confidence. Where do the Chinese start again feeling confident enough to say, let's not embarrass India further. I think India is not threatening us. India is not a primary threat. The primary threat is from elsewhere. My assessment, I don't think that's going to happen very soon. We'll continue in this mixed kind of game till the foreseeable future. But essentially, you don't want war. You don't want confrontation. But at the same time, keep the pressure, counter pressure on China. Make sure they don't intrude anywhere near Bhutan and in the eastern sector, and build up your capabilities in the meanwhile. I think this is for the long haul. This is not about to be settled very quickly because the Chinese purpose is strategic. It is not tactical.
So, what is the strategic purpose? Some would say, General Hasnain, it is to drive a permanent militarization of this area. That has probably been achieved. I don't see the Indian military pulling back from this for years to come, if not decades. Is it to oblige its vassal state Pakistan by constantly keeping two fronts on a perennial simmer? And the last question would be that do you agree with General Dua that one of the reasons that India had to, in a sense, sign on the dotted line is that it was an untenable, prolonged situation of tension with tanks and men eyeball to eyeball?
Great questions, Barkha. First, let me click on what KC Saab said, and I tend to agree with him, largely endorse what he has said. But I think it's a very important aspect that we must understand why the Chinese decided to do what they did in 2020. I think answers to that have not yet emerged with enough clarity. I still maintain that they were extremely concerned about the way in which India's strategic confidence seemed to be growing, and they wanted to deliver a clear message that India was number two, and it was not anywhere near China, even in competition. And that India should not be looking at the United States in terms of assisting the United States in terms of its containment of China as far as the Indo-Pacific was concerned. This was the prime intention behind it. It had a political strategic aim which could not be converted clearly to a military aim. You know, in military aim, they had options and options. They could have gone to all-out war. They could have gone to limited war. They could have gone just to a war for domination by technology and things like that. But they decided to only go for a very limited option along the line of actual control and virtually convert the line of actual control into the line of control, very similar to the situation with Pakistan. Now, with the current deployments of 50 to 60,000 troops, I agree with you that the situation is not going to change in a hurry. One of the intents of keeping this situation going at the moment is to make sure that India remains with its focus to the high Himalayas. It is happening in eastern Ladakh primarily because of the connection to the BRI and the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor also. It could have happened in Uttarakhand, it could have happened in Arunachal or anywhere else. They are intending primarily to ensure that our focus does not go into the maritime domain, which is the place where China fears India hugely. This is not an issue which has emerged so far in our discussion. Now, as far as what General Dua said, I endorse General Dua's statement absolutely. This is an issue which I should have actually started with also, and because I strongly believe that When a LAC becomes an LOC, then you have
Yeah.
bat action kind of situations. You have
Yeah.
this kind of situations where accidental things can happen. And these are
Yeah.
not of, if you had another Galwan, the LSC would be on fire completely and it would
Yeah.
not have been controlled. So I think this was very sensibly done with the intent that we can take our time on the other areas of transgression, but we will continue pressing for it through negotiations.
Oh, General Dua, how do you then explain that the military operation was clearly ready to climb up that escalatory ladder that you felt it was very important to climb down from? Without that military operation and then the eyeball to eyeball position that carried on for several months till it, information was available on it to journalists and of course to all of you. That was a risk. We did climb up the escalatory ladder with and given that we did that once, do you see more of that happening, or do you see now a very slow baby step approach to conflict resolution?
No, we had to climb up that escalatory ladder. It was a calculated risk. We had to go up to a certain point. Otherwise, we wouldn't have been able to get to a position of strength where uh, we could sit at the bargaining table, and also, like we spoke about, the fact that how we were looking down at the Moldo garrison and several other factors, that we could create a position of balance, tactically at least. So to that extent, this escalation of escalated ladder was essential, and we did it. As to how do we go ahead from here, do we need to do it again or not? I think it will all depend on how our engagements proceed. As of now, we are engaging with China on various fronts, uh, whether it's trade, diplomacy. There is friction, but then all engagements are continuing. It'll depend on that how it progresses, as well as it'll depend on how we move ahead, and I beg your pardon, how we move ahead in terms of any other troop movements or deployments as we get ready towards the end of this summer. I mean, I assume that we are really going to stay up there. Both
Yeah.
sides are going to continue to be engaged and be deployed.
and
Uh,
and and through and through another winter. I think that's
and
the
then,
important point to make.
yes,
Yeah.
and so when we start preparing for next winter, uh, as we start doing that, let's hope that our tempers don't get frayed and we don't see tactical incidents. Then General Hasnain mentioned larger points. How do we start engaging in those fora, whether it is Quad, whether it is a domination of the sea lanes down south, the maritime domination, and any other equation that might play over here. Mr. KC rightly mentioned that while in the seas, some places we are doing our patrolling alone and not along with the US at times. So the point that I'm trying to make is that, tactical situation apart, it will also depend on how we move ahead in our arrangements, linkages with other countries. So that remains to be seen.
Okay, I need to take final comments on what you think should happen from here on, not what is happening. Ambassador KC Singh, I'll start with you. How do you explain the change of mood? How did we go from extreme stridency in the public discourse around China, Sonam Wangchu and other Ladakhis calling from an economic boycott, even talk about the Chinese not sponsoring any cricket tournaments, to actually going back not to business as usual, but certainly to a more normalized version of relations?
I don't think it's fully normalized, but yes, certainly some parts of the relationship are working. Some kind of trade is available between the two countries. We've even made a demand that the students should be allowed to go back, their visa should be respected, and so on and so forth. I think it's selective engagement of China still. We are still watching. India is still distracted. We went into the second. First came the elections, then came the second wave. We are just about coming out of the second wave, and then we recover, and then we fear there may not be a third wave because the vaccination pace is very slow. So I think till end of the year, I don't see India doing anything to startle China or do anything which upsets China. At the same time, I don't see India rewarding China with what they want, which is high technology access to India with 5G and so on and so forth. So it's going to be very, it'll be a balancing game till the end of the year. Let's see how we get into next year, where the pandemic is controlled, global trade starts resuming its normal pace, and global engagements, person-to-person dealings start off. Maybe not next year, because large parts of the world may still be blocked, like Africa and so on and so forth, where vaccination is going to be very slow. Uh, but trust is broken. Once trust is broken, which we started establishing back in the late 80s, it can't be restored overnight. So I don't see India going back to the situation where we had a large, say, a buffer of multiple kilometers on both sides of the LAC, where we did not have the troops. I think that the new normal will be maybe not 50, 60,000 troops, but we'll have to have still a sufficient number of troops, because you don't trust the Chinese, and Chinese certainly don't trust us. So therefore, this lack of trust will take a long time to establish, and may not be possible while President Xi is around. It depends where he goes. There are many ways of looking at China, and many people saying there are weaknesses in China, which may not be visible. And those may come out in terms of where their economy is going, demographically, that they are challenged, there may be shortages of labor, and then the pressure of all these other countries coming together. So time is on the Indian side, hold the status quo, but at the same time, work with the others in a manner that China does not feel that you are provoking them any more than is necessary. So this irritation, competition will go on.
Okay, at least for the immediate future, and that would mean one more winter. I somehow think General Dua is going to mean many more winters. To that extent, it's often been called the new Siachen. Just your last thoughts before I give General Hasnain the last word.
Look, I see it like this. How China sees India. China sees India as the only country that is stoutly opposed the breed, that has banned, the only country that has actually banned hundreds of Chinese apps, the only country that has actually not allowed them participation in the infrastructure projects, road projects, as well as the telecom 5G projects. The only country, and we've actually stopped them in their adventurism in Ladakh. China is bound, so we have friction between us, yet we continue to engage with each other at different levels. Yes, I do see that we will remain engaged in a tactical situation in Eastern Ladakh in a big way for a fairly long time to come. I don't think we are going to solve it in one winter or two. We may be able to have enough confidence in whatever confidence building measures we institute for ourselves that we can de-escalate. So far we have disengaged. If we can de-escalate, both sides can de-escalate, even that, to my mind, will be an achievement.
General Hassan, do you see any signs of that? Because in some ways, since that dramatic Kailash operation and the resting back of areas around Pangong So Lake, nothing has moved on the other areas where the dispute continues to simmer.
Well,
Nothing substantive. Nothing substantive. I should correct myself.
The only silver lining which I notice in my observation about what is happening in China, what Xi Jinping is speaking and things like that, is two things. Number one, Xi Jinping recently has said that he is not too happy with this whole aspect of wolf warrior diplomacy. And the second thing is, he is not very happy about the perception of China, the image of China in the eyes of the world where China is doing business. He has spoken this very clearly in the meetings of the Chinese Communist Party. Now, this seems to be a silver lining somewhere, that China seems to be changing. Obviously, China can't change drastically. They will maintain their overall strategic stance, but softening to some extent is happening. And that may be something which may translate into not trying to coerce nations unnecessarily. The message from India was for the whole world. And I think this has probably dawned on them, as very correctly said by Mr. KC Singh, that they did not achieve their objectives. They did not achieve their strategic objectives. Since they failed in doing so, it is likely to be a change of tack. And I hope that happens. But on the positive side also, we are now the largest trading partners, India and China. between ourselves. I think sometime this year in February, the figures were crossed. We became the largest trading partners of each, or at least India's largest trading partner.
Yeah.
Then we have to be concerned about our neighborhood, where there is a certain amount of proactive diplomacy taking place from the Chinese side. We need to double up our efforts all together in the entire neighborhood. But the area where we really need to go much more proactive is the maritime domain. With all this aspect of preparation for the future, I think the focus must come onto the maritime. Because if we got to do business with the Quad, if we got to do business with these countries which are looking to become the NATO of the East, then ultimately it's the maritime domain, not the continental domain, which is going to pay dividends to those countries either. Up there in Ladakh, we are alone. We have to remember this, we are alone. As far as the maritime domain is concerned, the Indo-Pacific is concerned, we are with a host of other countries. So this is the stance we should maintain. And I think China is going to be a little softer in its approach into the near future. At least for this year, I don't foresee any such confrontation.
Okay, so we leave it there. I think that's very almost poetic that up there in Ladakh we are alone. So a moment to remember our soldiers who are going to spend, as General Dua said, not one, not two, but perhaps several winters, where as much as you need to focus on China, you need to focus on the weather, on the temperature, on simple things that we take for granted, like how to bathe, how to use the loo, not get a frostbite, unimaginable sort of living conditions for soldiers in the upper reaches of the Himalayas. And the anniversary of Galwan is one more context to actually take a moment to salute them. Thank you, Ambassador KC Singh, General Hasnain, and General Dua. Thank you. And to our audience, we're back on the road tomorrow, traveling as we report what we hope is the dwindling phase of the second wave. So catch our ground reports then. Thank you for watching and see you then. Goodbye. It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.